Bees. I'm your host, Dave Westcott. I've got with me co-host Scott the Beekeeper and special guest Brad Jones from Seola Bees. Good morning, Brad.
Good morning.
How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing all right. It's raining out. I guess the fall is definitely here. So
Yeah.
uh, it changes your mood when you wake up to the rain. I'm like, oh, okay, we're out of summer for sure this time, I think.
Yep.
It does change your mood. It feels like it's gloomy forever.
Yeah,
Yes.
strap in. We're going for the next 5 months like this in the Pacific Northwest. Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Brad, thanks for joining the call today. Um, can you share a little bit how you got into beekeeping? Maybe just a fun fact or something that the audience wouldn't know, just to help them get to know you a little bit. Maybe where you're located, and just share with us, yeah, kind of how you got into it, and then you've transitioned into business, beekeeping of the business, and share a little bit about that.
Sure. So, I mean, I guess the fun fact about it is the whole reason I got into beekeeping was for honey, which is not the fun fact actually in and of itself. But it was the fact that I wanted to brew honey mead, and I didn't want to spend the money uh, at the brew shop for all the honey necessary when I found out what it took, and I was first learning about it. And that was, gosh, I don't know, first time I really became aware of beekeeping as a hobby. Never really much thought of it. It was probably about maybe almost 20 years ago at this point. But yeah, I used to brew with my ex-spouse when we were first dating, brew beer and things like that. And so, we were trying other things, and trying, just different styles of beers. And went into a shop one day and saw that they were selling 5-pound containers of honey at, like, I think $4 or $5 a pound, which at that time was pretty spendy. Um, and I was asking why you would need that much honey, because typically it was like a pound of honey for a batch of beer. And the shop owner said, "Oh yeah, people make honey mead." And I was like, "Oh yeah, what's that?" I had no idea what it was. So there's a fun fact. I did not know what honey mead was. And then fast forward many years later, where to your question about where I live, as I moved to West Seattle, lived on a green belt called the Seola Green Belt. That's the name of the company. And was talking to a coworker one day who was very excited one morning, and I couldn't understand the energy. And so I asked her, and she said, "Well, I extracted honey for the first time last night." I said, "Oh, you're a beekeeper?" "Oh yeah, I've been thinking about it." And started having this conversation. She invited me to a Puget Sound Beekeepers Association meeting, and I got interested, and that was in 2009. And by the spring, I had my very first hive. I had one hive my first year, and by year two, I was trying to, keep up with 20 or 30 hives. Just it really grabbed hold. I'd seen
Wow.
a presentation on raising queen bees, which really got my attention back then. And so then they offered the Puget Sound Beekeepers Association had offered a 1 day, 4 hour, I don't know if you call it a class or workshop or what have you, learning about raising queen bees from none other than Sue Kobe. They call her the queen bee. She's out of UC Berkeley, and I think she splits time. She's up north too. Yeah, I don't know. She may be retired by now. I haven't seen much of her lately or read much. But at any rate, I took that, did that workshop, and that really grabbed hold of my fascination. Maybe increase my fascination, because I really wanted to raise queen bees and try to select, for all the right characteristics, having all these ideas in mind. And that's kind of the short story, and how I quickly went from just a guy wanting to get some honey to a guy who really wanted to be a beekeeper. But I was working full time, so I could only handle so much. But it was definitely
Mm-hmm.
a hobby run amok, as I like to say. And yeah, then somewhat, about 10 years ago, a little less than 10 years ago, I quit my day job, and the following year started doing this full time. So that's kind of the short story. And there's a lot of things that have happened, in all those years. But I mean, this is the conclusion of my 16th season. So I'm still doing it.
Well, congratulations. That's a long time. What would you say is
Yeah,
the number one thing you've learned along the way?
that it's almost never the same from year to year.
Really?
Uh,
No
yeah, I mean,
consistency.
well, yes and no. I mean, I think there's always variance. I mean, I joke with other beekeepers like, "Oh, this year it's going to be the big year," and it just doesn't really ever turn out this exactly the same every year because of weather and what have you. And you're always going to learn something. I mean, that's the biggest thing is like there's always something new that comes up.
Mm.
It seems like no matter how many times, how many thousands of inspections I've done, um, you know, something new seems to come up every season at least that I've never seen before. So
Wow. How many hives do you have?
right now, about 70 or so.
Okay.
I was hoping to have more, but again, one of those seasonal things that you can't anticipate that. Like this year, just very very little nectar flow. So bees just were not having it. They weren't growing like I'd seen in past years.
What's the best part of beekeeping? And then maybe what is the hardest part or one of the hardest parts? And um, yeah, go ahead and share that.
The best and the hardest, huh? Well, I mean, for me, I mean, and we'll probably get into this a little more later in terms of what my business really is. Still the best part of beekeeping for me is actually working with the bees. I mean, that's why I keep doing it mostly. It's not because I feel like, oh, I'm going to get rich at this or anything like that. It's because I had to make a decision um, for my own health at one point. At least not my. I had to make a for my own, mental health and well being, which was, to quit a job and start doing beekeeping full time, quitting a good paying, IT job because it just wasn't fulfilling. It was burning me out, and I was not enjoying it. And so, just working with the bees, it forces you. And as you know, Scott specifically, but um, Dave, I'm not sure how much beekeeping you've actually done, but when you're with bees, you don't have any other choice but to be focused right there with them. If you're distracted, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to get stung. You're going to damage a colony. You're going to hurt them essentially. So it's kind of like in a way like having an infant. You have to be really gentle, but they're a lot tougher than you think they are. And they bring they just bring kind of a sense of peace for me, and I'm always fascinated no matter how many times I go in. I always get that little thrill when I spot the queen still there, because that's the hardest thing about in doing inspections often is finding the queen, even when she's got a paint dot on her. But uh, and that that's the one thing, and the hardest thing actually, I think, is just the pace of a season, keeping up with it, especially as you scale up and being a one man show more or less. It's I have a certain capacity, and as you get older, it gets tougher to maintain a pace. So you got to really start viewing yourself, you as an athlete. You have to, get your rest. You got to eat right. You got to know when to say when, and learn. Like as I've gotten older, I've had to learn. I can't do 2, 3, 4 straight days of hard labor, 6 hours in the sun, lifting heavy stuff all day long. I have to. I got to pace myself. Okay, day on, a lighter day the second day, and depending how my body's feeling, take a whole day and do administrative work or whatever, or podcasts, for instance, or something like that. But you learn to kind of, that's the hardest thing is just, it
Mm.
is just keeping up a good pace. And that's why, I am working more towards getting into a commercial type of setup so I can do more things with machines and less with my body.
Mm.
Have you ever experienced over these 16 years like extreme hive loss?
Yes, yes. In the beginning, and I'm, for mea culpa for just to inform everybody, I had the intention of doing it without using any sort of treatments for mites. And one winter, and that was kind of the winter that kind of made me make the decision, because actually, when I did quit my day job, I was doing some side gigs still in IT. But like that winter, that was 2004, 2015, 16. I lost all of my hives. Now there were some
Wow.
extenuating circumstances into that, and I hadn't done any form of treatments besides just doing integrated pest management type of techniques and brood breaks and what have you, which is a very intensive way to keep bees. I mean, it takes a lot of work, a lot more time per hive, and as you scale up, you don't have the time to sit there and go through every one individually and do a really in-depth inspection to figure out what little things you might see, figure out what they are, if there's a problem or not, and all of that. But so that was my extreme situation, and I had to make a decision at that point to about whether I was going to keep going or just get another job and just keep it as a hobby and scale it back down because I was at about 50 hives at that point, or get full in. And so I chose to go all in and started using, the organic acid, the formic pros and the oxalic acid type of treatments and all the other kind of softer treatments, and you know got my percentages better than zero. But still, every year I lose between probably 30 and 40%. It seems,
Wow.
and it's just like because I think it so a lot of it is trying to push weaker hives in through the winter, which I can't help myself sometimes. I think, oh, that looks pretty good, but I think we can do it with this, and the weather turns on you, and you get a long stretch of rain or something, and your bees will starve to death on you in February, March when they're looking good in January, that kind of thing. But so it doesn't happen all at once. It seems to happen over the course of months. But yes, but I always expect at this point some loss. I could be a better uh, fall beekeeper, getting my bees ready. That's definitely a place I need to work, but always working, it seems like. But yeah, so I've experienced it. It was demoralizing, um, but it kind of has become kind of a cost of doing business in the model I've been doing it, which is just pretty much backyard beekeeping, selling honey, and that's it. I'm not I do some markets and a little bit of retail, but that's really it. It's not very sustainable at this point, which is why we're probably having this conversation. But yes, I would say, I guess, for your listeners trying out, I'm too verbose at this point. It's just that you should expect some loss over time because there's just a lot of stuff that's attacking our bees or a lot of challenges the bees have, and sometimes they get sick for whatever reason, or they're just you can't really catch every single problem and fix it and address it unless it's widespread. You're not going to necessarily going to be able to do that individual care sometimes you'd like, so you kind of generalize and do, okay, we're just going to do this for every hive now, just to make sure that we hit everything that could possibly go wrong. But
Awesome.
Brad, you mentioned fall beekeeping being a challenging time. What do you do? Maybe just for our listeners who have a wide variety of experience. Some listening might be active beekeepers. Some might be wanting to get into beekeeping, and so this is kind of educational for them. As it transitions from summer to fall, and obviously winter is coming, what do you typically do in that time frame?
well, I mean, end of summer is when you do your splits, to get your numbers up, to get your increases up, and um, it gives you enough time to feed them to make if necessary, and generally, and especially around here, August is, we have a dearth, so it's dry. We're coming off of the blackberry flow. If your bees are staying in place, there's going to be somewhat of a dearth for several weeks. So that's it. They will eat through their stores and possibly even starve if you're not paying attention. And you feed them syrup, with other supplements if you feel like you want to do that. Um, like vitamin supplements, things, anything you do to just kind of help them out, because syrup, it's okay, but it doesn't have the same kind of nutritional qualities as honey. And, that's the same thing. So you just check to make sure that the bees have enough food stores, and then you feed them, treat them at that point for your mites, and then that, give that a good 6 week kind of run to make sure that you can, when you do your late summer, early fall inspections, you can kind of generally gauge how healthy they are. And then at that point, you can combine weaker colonies into one and to try to make sure you have a good, strong colony. Because the real key is having a good, strong population, healthy, strong population. And they're not just a bunch of bees, but healthy bees. And in the past, that's where, things would look good going into like October. And when I wasn't doing treatments, but what I didn't know at the time, and I've learned since, is that just because you have a lot of bees doesn't mean they're all healthy. And if there's one, you can see one mite, there's 10 more you can't. And you're seeing them, that usually means there's a really bad infestation. And it's been fairly recently discovered that those mites don't feed on, they don't suck the blood of bees. They actually feed off the fat body, which compromises their immune system and everything. So they look good, but as soon as the temperatures drop, they become susceptible to other diseases. So they're just kind of the varroa infestation is the biggest thing. So, what I've learned is like, okay, just assume they're there, treat them. And so that you can generally assume when you're seeing a strong colony, at this time of year, that it's a healthy, strong colony. So all you really have to worry about is making sure they have enough food for the winter.
Wow, that's cool. That's that's good information. What would you say to anybody who's new to beekeeping or wants to get into beekeeping or is kind of thinking about taking the plunge? What kind of advice would you give them?
Oh, well, I used to do a lot of presentations, and this is what I still, for like the hobbyist, the backyard beekeeper, what I always recommend to people um, is that when you start out, no two, when if you're in beekeeping long enough, it doesn't take very long to figure it out. But if you're looking at two different hives side by side, they will be very different when you inspect them. They will behave differently. Sometimes they'll have different strengths and weaknesses. It's just the nature of things. So when you're first starting out, first of all, make sure you have space and that that your neighbors are cool with it if you live in the city, because you I've had a few issues with people before because
You're
they're
in West
afraid of
Seattle.
bees. Yeah, yeah. I've had a few issues. I shouldn't say people, a person, but it happens. People get, be ready to, I guess a couple things. Now I think about it. If you're going to get started, first of all, study, 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 read about everything you can. Um, and nowadays you can go online and see a bunch of YouTube videos and listen to a podcast, for instance. Back when I started, that wasn't a big thing, so I was reading books, just the old fashioned books, but there's a lot of really good material out there. So for the beginner, I say, and this was advice given to me, which was, if you're going to read any book to start, read, Beekeeping for Dummies, because it covers kind of the whole spectrum of what beekeeping is, what it can be, right? And it talks about all the various diseases and signs of diseases and different types of bees, different races of bees, and so you get a really good general knowledge out of that book. And so I would definitely suggest that, and then go with what I call 2.5 hives, which is two full size colonies in your plan and a nucleus colony. You have an extra queen on hand. As it wasn't so much that way the first few years I was keeping bees, but it seems like whenever I go out to do inspections on a yard with 20 hives, I have to have usually one or two queens on hand to requeen, or to put a queen in a hive that lost its queen for whatever reason, or as a non-laying queen. But so 2.5, because A, you're guaranteed probably at least one hive will produce some honey, and B, if one is lagging and needs support, you can do equalization by sharing the resources of frames of bees and larvae, and that nuke can be your kind of your extra queen. And at the end of the season, if you don't want to carry a nuke into the winter, you can just split the whole resources up, and all the resources up into the last two hives, and put them to bed. But you'll learn a lot more, a lot faster, by having two full size colonies, and you'll just be better off going forward. You won't have, hopefully, um, losses. Because when you only have two hives, there's a pretty good chance, even odds, you might lose both of those hives of the winter. It's around here, it's tough unless you take care of all the important things of making sure that your bees are healthy and they have enough food. They're not, sitting under a waterfall come wintertime, like run off from the
Right.
roof or something. You got to make sure that everything is set up. So, and we can get into that in detail as well. But if you want, I don't know how much you want me to talk about setting up a yard or anything like that, but just getting started, be ready to kind of educate yourself and start the season before you actually engage, because usually what I get are a lot of phone calls in June or July and people are like, hey, I want to start bees right now. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, and I always try to softly discourage that. I say, you know what? It's the main part of the beekeeping season is pretty much over. At that point, you're just maintaining and getting your honey and getting ready for the fall, essentially. In the spring is when all the action is, because you got swarm control, you've got different flows, and that's your most intense time. You're going to need to be looking at your bees weekly to make sure that they're healthy. And but at any rate, yeah, I mean, I can go into all of the different details, but mostly for my main suggestions are just go with a couple of hives so you learn a lot, and start educating yourself the season before and getting your equipment purchased and ready to go. Because one of the things that happens uh, invariably to me every year is I'm short of certain equipment certain times. When you have a bad swarm season, for instance, and all of a sudden you're running out of bottom boards and boxes and frames, uh,
Uh,
you're like, wow, okay, so you got to scramble to, get that equipment, so you don't miss out on, another hive or a flow or something like that. So get a head start on all of it, and if you're doing it for a hobby, you can easily, even just in a small room in your house, knock out, construction of a couple of hives. And if you wanted to do it all by hand and paint it and everything and have everything ready to go, and just strap in, and get ready for the ride, because it could be fun. I mean, it's not that bad, but it can be crazy around swarm season. People are uh, still, I mean, surprised every year when they have a swarm. You see, it's like I'm like, okay,
Mm.
can't no matter what, it happens. But it wasn't
yep.
bad this year for a lot of reasons, mostly because the wasn't enough food out there for them, so they weren't trying to grow as fast as they normally do.
Mm.
Mm.
Anyway, getting off in the weeds there.
No, that's good. A lot of valuable information there. I was wondering, um, and you don't have to give up all the trade secrets, but you said honey is kind of your main thing or one of your main things. Can you walk our audience through the different flows and different maybe varieties, specifically here? If someone's listening on Colorado or something, it might be different. But
Sure.
what
Yeah.
what what are the honey flows that you try and get your bees to, or how much do you? It's like this is a mainstay, and then like some years I might pursue this, some years I might pursue that, etc. Just could you share a little bit about some of that insight with our audience?
Yeah. I'm going to go really high level and basic. I mean, there's tons of little flows. I'm not an expert on all the various, plants that are available, and most of my experience has been in a city, so it varies quite a bit within the city. But the main flow that we hope for is the broadleaf maple trees in the springtime. So that could start in March and April. It's whether it's helpful or not is really dependent on the weather. Um, so that's the main one. If you have a good spring where you get enough, we got the confluence of events. Your bees are building up, and the flow starts, and there's some dryish weather for about 10 days. You can actually get a crop of maple honey, a good crop. Now, there are tricks to giving yourself every advantage, but that's the first flow. I'll get into the tricks later if we want to talk about that, but I'll be pretty general right now. Um, so that's the first thing you can get is maple, and when you get it, it's super delicious honey. At that time there are also other flowers starting to bloom, but your main flow, where you'll get any sort of like crop potential, is from a maple. Um, and this is just assuming we're not taking bees to like a field of buckwheat or clover or something. We're just talking about backyard beekeeping. Keeping your bees stationary one year, not doing any migratory stuff. So that's our main flow. And then by the time that's wavering and the swarms start to happen, we're getting into June, and your colony's getting bigger. That's an indication. Swarms are an indication that there's lots of food and or they're crowded and they want to divide into another colony. So once you get past that, at the mid part to end of June, you'll start to see your first blackberries bloom, and that's our big one. So by the time, usually around the first week of July, the heat hits, you should have your first, larger, I guess, larger population of flowers, spitting out nectar. So that flow starts, and that's where you can make your honey, and that's when you want all your hives ready to go and all your equipment ready to go. Because if all the circumstances line up, you're going to have a lot of water in the ground, and those plants are going to have a lot of capacity to produce nectar and a lot of heat that isn't like 100 degrees heat, but like 80, 85. Boom, you're at 90 degrees. You will get a large flow of blackberry nectar, and that's kind of how you bank for the winter. That's the one that will set your bees up. Right there. We're already talking about winter in July, because if they fill up their entire hive plus give you honey, they're going to have enough workforce and enough food to get through a dearth in August. Um, and possibly and then we're looking at the end of the season at that point, the last potential harvest, which is late summer. I call both spring and late summer potential because you just don't know, because it gets dry in here, and that might actually, squash some of the plants that, squash the hopes of a beekeeper, hoping that some of the plants produce nectar, like a Japanese knotweed. So far, we're talking about two invasive species that produce a lot of honey, but we used to get a lot of Japanese knotweed before they started eradicating it, which was a nice, pretty big flow, about the same size as a maple. But so you could get 3 harvests of honey theoretically, just with your backyard hives.
Mm.
But that's you're always kind of banking on blackberry, and there are other flowers like linden trees and other plants that are around, and fireweed in the lowlands, fireweed up in the mountains, or in the lowlands. You'll get various smaller flows from plants pretty much consistently, and a strong colony can capitalize on that a little bit. Maybe not enough for a huge honey crop, but ultimately, it's the blackberry that gets your bees set up for the winter. And that's also because that's when you can split those hives, because they're all pretty strong. And then the other thing that we do, is have been doing is hauling some bees up into the mountains for fireweed flows.
Wow.
So now you're starting to kind of get into some migratory work a little bit, and there are other ways to get bees. I'm not talking about, this is all just strictly from a hobbyist perspective, though. Right now, if you keep your bees in one place all of the time, this is kind of what you should expect: is maple, blackberry, then maybe some knotweed and other late summer bloomers, and then you're getting ready for winter again.
Yeah.
That's awesome. We're getting close to time, so you're bringing us in for a landing. But I've got just 2 things. One, any final tips for the audience, and then second would be, if somebody wants to purchase your honey, if they want to get in connection with you, how would they do that? What's the best way to reach you? So on and so forth.
Well, the best way to reach me is via text. We all get a lot of like scam or spam phone calls, so I tend, if I don't have somebody in my contact list, I tend to let that go to voicemail and call them back. So if you want to get a more immediate response from me, a text is the best way. And to get my honey, I do a couple of farmers markets. One for the Neighborhood Farmers Market Association that's out of Seattle here, and I do the Columbia City Market, from I guess about mid-May until October if I have honey, and also the Delridge Farmers Market, which is here in West Seattle. And I do have a couple of retail places where I sell my honey, my local honey, to Highland Park Corner Store in West Seattle,
Okay.
the Super Deli Mart in West Seattle, and also Wildwood Market in West Seattle. So just those are the 3 places that I wholesale a little bit as I have honey to sell anyway. So.
Awesome. And any final tips for our listeners?
No, I mean, but just reiterate, what I've said, which is, you know, or mostly, I guess one thing I should have said is get connected with your local beekeeping club.
Yeah.
Um, that's where you're going to find the most information. I mean, you get two beekeepers in a room, and you're going to have three opinions sometimes about how to do things, but uh, it's all useful. You can compare. Use your critical thinking skills when you're starting to listen to other people. But another cool thing, especially here in Seattle, is Puget Sound Beekeepers Association has what they call neighborhood captains. So if you go to a meeting, talk to the officers at the meeting and tell them where you're from and you're trying to learn. They're going to say, oh, this person is in your neighborhood, and that gives you a resource to somebody who's literally probably within a couple miles of you. So if you have a problem when you're first starting out, those folks are usually very good about taking their time to help you out. So yeah, get connected with a good club and just ask a lot of questions and have fun.
That's awesome. That's great information. It's been a fantastic show. Scott, any final comments on your end?
Uh, Brett, thanks for joining us. Look forward to continue to learn from you and work with you, and hope our audience gains some insights as a backyard beekeeper or pick something up along the way. So just yeah, thanks for joining the call, and follow Teach Me Bees. Subscribe, like us, review us, share with a friend.
That's right. Give
Yep.
us a
Thanks,
like, give
guys.
us a share, drop your comments into the comments box. Brad, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. It's been a fantastic show. We really appreciate the time that you've had with us today. I'm your host, Dave Westcott. Follow me on Instagram, LinkedIn, anywhere where it's social. I'm hanging out. Thank you very much. And Brad, have a great day.
You too. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, guys.